Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Viewpoint. I'm Jim Hadley. Our topic this morning, the controversial issue of same-sex marriage in the district. And our guests this morning present two very different views. First, we have the Reverend Barry Lynn, Executive Director of Americans United for Separation of Church and State, and the Reverend Harry Jackson from the Stand for Marriage Coalition and Senior Pastor of Hope Christian Church. Let's give some background if we can, gentlemen. Last week, the D.C. Council voted 12-1 in favor of recognizing same-sex marriages that were performed in other states. I think we have 5 states now in the country that recognize same-sex marriage. Where do things stand now in terms of the district recognizing those sanctioned marriages?
Well, maybe I should speak first. The district has voted. The law is now going to go up to Congress, or Congress has 30 days to approve it or just let it go through. President could veto it. And there are other options that we can take to respond to it, but it's sailing toward becoming law of the land as we speak, and I believe it was surreptitiously done. The people didn't have a say. A last-minute amendment was put forth originally April 7th. I was in the chambers, first time I'd been inside the chambers in my whole life, that day, ironically, when they passed it. And they were high-fiving each other, figuratively speaking, saying, we're going to do this thing, we're finally going to have this and that and the other. So this was, in my opinion, the beginning of Armageddon about marriage, and nobody knew about it.
Reverend Lynn, the reaction on Capitol Hill will be far different, if at all. What do you predict to happen up there?
Frankly, I think Capitol Hill is going to leave this alone, because I think the very idea of something they passed a few years ago called the Defense of Marriage Act is that states would make decisions about whether to recognize or not to recognize marriages in other states. The District of Columbia wisely has agreed to do so, and I hope the Congress keeps them alone. It's interesting, Bishop Jackson complains about this technicality. If there had been 15 hearings on this subject and you had been invited to testify at every one, you'd still complain about the result, because fundamentally Bishop Jackson does not see this, as I see it, as the fundamental civil rights issue of the 21st century. This is about equality. This is about a justice. This is about making things right for the residents of this community and around the country.
Let's talk about the residents, because Marion Barry said that what made him change his mind on this vote and become the lone dissent is that he was listening, he said, to his constituents. You say many of your constituents were not heard. Is that important in this issue, or is it a civil rights issue, and how much voice should residents have?
Let me address that. I think it's important. There are two different issues, whether I agree with it or not. I think there's a concept of due process we have to deal with. That certainly wasn't followed. It wasn't even on the docket. They slipped it in as an amendment to something listed on April 7th. People, we were calling and talking to pastors all over the region. Folks said, what happened? We didn't know about it. I don't believe it. And right now, there's a have and have not, black, white, rich, poor split in the district, where many African Americans are saying, how can they do it? There was a time where they'd even listen to the ministers. What are they doing? And that's really the way that things are coming forth right
Bishop,
now.
You as a minister and I as a minister have the right to make all kinds of personal comments and discuss this in any way we want. But the truth is, the reason politicians properly don't always listen to us is because sometimes our arguments are based on religion, on theology, on our holy scriptures. This is not a country, nor is this a city, that makes its judgments based on your interpretation of the Bible or, frankly, my interpretation. That's an interesting debate. It's not one that the City Council should have, and it didn't have, because it sees this as a matter of a fundamental right. Marriage has been defined as a fundamental right by the United States Supreme Court, and we also have this concept called equal protection. If it's equal protection, we have to equally defend the right of same-sex and opposite-sex couples to marry and accept the rights and the responsibilities of marriage. What's wrong with that?
Reverend Jackson, is this a civil rights issue?
I don't think so. The society has the ability to tell people that two close relatives shouldn't marry. A 3-year-old and a 50-year-old shouldn't get married. There's certain criteria that we have to protect the next generations. Think about it this way. We've got a marital disintegration that's going on right now in all of America, especially in the black community. Out of wedlock births, all kind of things. Where people, sociologists, have looked at this, we find that same-sex unions begin a process of devaluation of this institution. Also,
but you're saying that it's already been devalued when we haven't had gay marriage.
I'm not sure I'm following your question. I'm saying it has already started down a slippery slope, and that this may push us down an accelerated path.
Why would that possibly happen? If 50% of marriages end in divorce, which I think is a tragedy also,
yeah.
But why in the world would we now, or anyone, try to scapegoat the gay and lesbian community and say, well, they could make it worse? There's no evidence, by the way, in other countries that this makes it worse or increases divorce.
Dr. Stanley Kurtz is a PhD from Harvard, taught at Harvard, who has studies out that talk about the fact that there's an acceleration of this devaluation, this fabric. Then we look at history. No one can tell me that one of the byproducts of the decadence of Rome and Greece was not this open homosexual activity. So we're dealing with a value. We're dealing with the idea that whoever shapes the laws shapes the thing in the next generation. This is not about my opinion. It's not about bigotry. It's about what will kids be taught in school.
Well,
it's about, when you change marriage, you change family parenting, and schools.
Okay, you've opened up a whole other door. We've got to take a break. We'll come right back and pick up from there. Stay with us for more Viewpoint. Welcome back to Viewpoint on our issue this morning, the controversial topic of same-sex marriage in the district. And I think we may have a little wiggle room on agreement here. I raised the issue of civil unions. You're not in support of it, Reverend Jackson. Reverend Lynn, you say it's not enough.
No, it's not enough. It's kind of like separate but equal wasn't enough. And that's exactly the similarity that I want to draw here. This is a civil rights issue. You know, there's a woman named Mildred Loving. She was an African-American woman who married a white man in the District of Columbia in 1958. She moved back to Virginia. She was arrested. They were charged with the crime of interracial marriage. She took that case to the United States Supreme Court in 1967. They said those laws that prohibited white people of color from marrying was unconstitutional, a violation of fundamental justice. Mrs. Loving died just about a year ago today of pneumonia. Before she died, though, she issued a statement saying that she wanted gay couples to have the same rights that she and her husband had had because the times were changing, and it was about love, it was about justice. And that, to me, is why this is so important as a civil rights issue. And by the way, the red herrings that Bishop Jackson brought up in the last segment, there's so many of them, and they've been out of refrigeration too long. We draw lines in the law. Because we say people of the same sex can marry does not mean that there are no age limits on marriage. It doesn't mean you can marry, as Bill O'Reilly said the other night, your turtle. This is nonsense. We draw lines. This is a sensible line to draw and erase the prejudice that used to affect interracial couples.
How is it different than, Reverend Jackson, your response?
Well, Jim, there are immutable characteristics of race. So I resent, as African American, the fact that he thinks that this is somehow similar. I don't see 4,700 gays lynched since the Civil War. I don't see the Senate having to apologize to it. It's a totally different thing. Many people in this city are privileged. They've got great jobs, make more money than average. To say that I'm gay, sometimes I have to expose myself in a sense, or let people know what I am. It's not the same thing as you walk down the street, you know I'm black. I can't change it. I have friends and people in our congregation who used to be gay who now are not. I have one man who used to live in a gay lifestyle who is married, has kids. And I know lots of folks around the country. So it's not the same thing. And I resent the fact that we keep hearing it's a civil right by people who've never been stoned, spit on. My dad was threatened at gunpoint. Wait a minute. My dad was threatened at gunpoint in Florida. The state trooper discharges a pistol over his head, temporarily deafening him. And he tells him he shouldn't be involved in voter registration and things of that that nature. That's real discrimination that's tangible in a very real way. 400 years of slavery and oppression you can't compare with something that could be in some cases a choice.
No, you know, it's interesting, though. What matters, I think, is the individual. It happens to be a big issue, and we know that. And if Matthew Shepard were alive today, but he's not because he was killed. And now here we go.